They say cabin syndrome is just a psychological reaction to isolation. But what I lived through in that cabin goes far beyond madness. And if you've ever felt watched when you were completely alone, maybe you've already experienced it without even knowing. Before I tell you what happened in that cabin, subscribe so you stay with me. This is not a story you want to hear alone. I never believed in something as vague and poetic as cabin syndrome, the idea that isolation can bend your mind until you start to see things that aren't there, hear footsteps in empty rooms, or feel eyes in the darkness. But after what happened last winter, I'm no longer sure the mind is the only thing bending. When I agreed to spend a week alone in my friend Daniel's remote cabin, I was hoping for nothing more than peace and inspiration, a chance to escape the noise of the city. Instead, I walked straight into something that was watching me long before I realized I wasn't alone. The first night I arrived, the cabin seemed harmless enough. It was a small wooden structure tucked between thick pines, overlooking a frozen lake, so still it looked carved from stone. Inside, everything smelled of old pine and winter dust, a place untouched for months, maybe longer, but I didn't mind. I unpacked, lit the fireplace, and settled into the creaking old armchair beside the window. I thought I would finally have the quiet I needed to finish my writing project. Except as the night deepened and the wind brushed against the cabin walls like fingertips, I started hearing faint tapping sounds. They weren't loud enough to be concerning, but they were persistent enough to keep me awake. Small, irregular taps that seemed to come from the far wall, then the ceiling, then the floor beneath the bed, like something small was testing the wood from different angles. I told myself it was just animals or branches shifting in the wind. But the wind had died hours earlier, leaving the forest in an unnatural silence. It was so complete that I could hear the fireplace crackle like bones snapping one by one. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of being watched through the window by a tall shape, standing perfectly still among the trees. Its silhouette was bending slightly, as if trying to see inside. In the dream, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from the hollow dark where its eyes should have been. When I woke up, heart pounding, the dream clung to me with an awful familiarity, as if it wasn't a dream at all, but a memory rearranged into something less terrifying. The next day, I noticed strange little details inside the cabin that hadn't been there before. The wooden chair near the table was turned slightly toward the bedroom door. The curtains on the kitchen window were drawn, even though I remembered leaving them open. And my notebook, which I had left on the armchair the night before, was now on the floor, open to a blank page. There were faint pressure marks on it, as if someone had dragged a finger down the paper, writing nothing, but wanting to. I tried to rationalize it as forgetfulness, but the unease stayed with me. It intensified as the daylight faded too quickly for the season, slipping away behind the trees as if the sun had been pulled down by strings. By early evening, I already had the fireplace going again, trying to keep the cold at bay as shadows stretched long and thin across the wooden floor. But these shadows didn't seem to match the shape of the cabin furniture. Instead, they bent inward toward the center of the room, as though they were drawn to something I couldn't see. That night, the tapping grew louder, more rhythmic. It was coming from inside the walls rather than outside, moving steadily along the wood like fingers feeling for weak points. And every time it stopped, I found myself holding my breath, waiting for it to start again. Because the silence felt heavier, more dangerous, as though something was listening back. At one point, around 3 a.m., I heard the soft creak of a floorboard in the hallway. The sound was so distinct and so close that I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. I stared at the crack in the door, where a thin sliver of orange firelight spilled into the room, half expecting to see a shadow pass through it, but nothing came. I stayed awake until dawn, too afraid to close my eyes, watching the shadows shrink slowly from the walls as pale morning light seeped through the frosted windows. By then I convinced myself I just needed fresh air. So I bundled up and stepped outside, breathing in the icy air as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky. But when I turned back toward the cabin, I noticed something that froze me in place. The footprints I had left the night before, leading from the car to the door, were still there. But next to them, almost overlapping, was another set of prints. They were larger, deeper, as if someone heavier had followed right behind me, matching my steps exactly, and yet There were no prints leading away from the cabin. None at all? I stared at them for long minutes, trying to convince myself they were just distortions from melting snow. But the shape was unmistakable, long, wide impressions ending in points like elongated toes. When the cold finally pushed me back inside, I locked the door, even though the latch suddenly felt like decoration rather than protection. I tried to read a book, to write something to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to the dream of the figure watching me from the woods. The longer I stayed, the more I began to feel that something in the cabin was watching me too. Not from the windows or the door, but from the corners. The places where the shadows thickened unnaturally, places I avoided without understanding why. On the third night, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing quietly inside the bedroom closet. A slow, steady exhale, like the sound of sleep. When I opened the closet door with shaking hands, there was nothing inside except my coat and a faint smell of damp earth. But the breathing continued for a full second after the door swung open, as if whatever had been inside hadn't realized it had been discovered. By then, I couldn't pretend this was isolation or imagination anymore. Something was inside the cabin with me, something that didn't care whether I believed in it or not. That night, the tapping returned again, but this time right beside my headboard, sharp and deliberate. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard not just tapping, but whispers. They were too faint to understand, but undeniably human in cadence. The voice was too low, too deep, vibrating through the wood like it belonged to a throat that didn't use breath the way people do. When the whispers stopped, there came a slow, dragging sound in the attic, like something crawling its way across the beams directly above me. The thought hit me that whatever had been outside watching me had found its way in. Not through doors or windows, but through the cabin itself, as if the walls weren't barriers, but channels. Each night, the sounds grew clearer, closer. The cabin itself seemed to react. The temperature dropped rapidly without explanation. Frost formed inside the windows in strange spirals resembling fingerprints. I began waking with the sense of someone standing over me, the air shifting as if displaced by a presence leaning down to examine me. Each time I jolted upright, the room would be empty, silent, except for the faint smell of cold soil lingering in the air like a ghost of footsteps. By the fifth night, I stopped trying to sleep entirely. I sat in the armchair with the fire burning low, staring at the hall as a faint shape formed there. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its outline bent slightly, as though its spine wasn't built like a human's, and although I never saw its face, I sensed its eyes hollow and patient, studying me with an intelligence that felt older than the cabin, older than the forest. I realized then that cabin syndrome wasn't madness or isolation. It was something the mind creates when it cannot accept the truth that something is truly there. Something that enters the cracks of a lonely place and expands, learning you, matching your routines, mimicking your breathing, adjusting your shadows until you can no longer tell which ones belong to you. The last night I was there, just before dawn, the thing finally approached the bed. Its weight bent the mattress, as if testing how close it could get before I broke. When I opened my eyes, I didn't see it, but I felt its shape leaning over me. I felt cold fingers brush the air inches from my cheek, not touching, but sensing, memorizing. When I finally fled the cabin at sunrise, running through the snow without looking back, I knew something followed. Not physically, but inside me. A presence that had learned my movements, my breath, my fear. And it still whispers some nights when I try to sleep, reminding me that sometimes what we call madness is just reality we aren't prepared to see. If you're still here, comment below. I need to know you made it out of the cabin too.